Good afternoon, and welcome to Until Justice Just Is, brought to you by YWCA Seattle, King, Snohomish. I'm Lou Rochelle Brim Atkins, your MC for today. I'm a long-time supporter of the YWCA and member of the People of Color Executive Council, or POCEC. Today's event, formerly known as the Stand Against Racism, has been proudly brought to you by POCEC since 2011. What began as a small gathering has grown into a regional event with nearly 300 participants joining us online. So welcome. Each year we shine a light on different forms of systemic racism in education, healthcare, media, and the justice system. And this year, during a time of growing division and civil rights challenges, we're focusing on a critical issue that deeply affects our region: immigration. Washington is home to a rich, diverse community, yet the current political and legal climate has caused real fear and uncertainty. Today's conversation is meant to cut through that fear, to dispel harmful myths, share real facts, and offer concrete ways that you can take action. And most importantly, to celebrate the strength, beauty, and resilience of our immigrant communities. Let's begin today's event by grounding ourselves in a land acknowledgement. In honoring the original inhabitants of this land, we gratefully acknowledge the native peoples on whose sovereign ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant native communities who make their home here today. We reside on the stolen lands of the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. Many indigenous peoples thrive in this place, alive and strong. We pay our respects to the Coast Salish nations and ancestors of this place, and reaffirm our relationship with one another, and to remind ourselves that by being here today, we strive to remedy the injustice done to indigenous peoples through our beliefs and actions, in helping to steward and uphold historical and sacred spaces within and around Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. It's my honor to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Caedmon Magboo Cahill. Caedmon is someone who approaches the world with deep curiosity, spending her time trying to understand people, how real and lasting change happens, the ongoing journey toward liberation, and her beloved dog. With abolition as her guiding light, Caedmon brings over 25 years of experience working on some of the most critical issues in our justice system. Her path has included roles as a public defender, a civil legal aid attorney, and a government policymaker, always with a focus on equity, dignity, and justice. Today, Caedmon serves as the director of the Policy Advocacy Department at the ACLU of Washington, where she leads a powerhouse team working to protect civil rights and civil liberties while advocating bold, community-driven solutions to the most urgent challenges we face. Please join me in welcoming Caedmon Magboo Cahill.
Good afternoon. I'm Caedmon, and I am really grateful to be having this conversation today. I think it goes without saying that we're facing pretty alarming times when it comes to immigration. We're seeing our loved ones and our neighbors and our community members being removed, being deported. And in some instances, we literally do not have words to describe what we are seeing. We are seeing masked men come in unmarked cars, not identifying themselves, and abducting people, and kidnapping people, and disappearing people. And in some cases, they're being sent to a prison outside of this country for a sentence of life we don't even know, without any process. And in some instances, we don't even know where our community members have gone. We just know that they're not here anymore. And we are struggling to keep our families safe. We're struggling to keep our neighbors and community safe. The fear is palpable. I think that if any of us have immigrant family members or friends, we're doing the worst case scenario planning. We're making sure that they have a plan in case they are also removed or disappeared. And yet, just this week, a poll came out from, I think it was Economist YouGov, that said that 45% of Americans think that Trump is on the right course with his immigration policies, that this all makes sense, that this is all just. Almost half of the United States feels like this is acceptable. And part of me is like, how is that possible? But then the other part of me is not surprised at all, because we look at the history of immigration and we look at the history of this country, and we know that there is this consistent narrative of who belongs and who doesn't, who is dangerous, who is deserving, and who needs to leave. And we're manipulated to think that immigration policy is about public safety and that it's about national security. And I think we have a feeling that we've never seen these tactics before. But let me tell you that they are all from a toolbox, from tools that we have used over and over again, and none of these tools are new. I think we have this story in America that America has always been so welcoming, and we've always valued immigrants, and we have an idea of a Statue of Liberty that welcomed immigrants to our shore. But the reality is that we've only valued certain immigrants. And as we know, so much of who we valued is really tied up with race. So part of this conversation today, I'm going to go through 3 immigration policies that are in the Trump toolbox that I think are really part of the archetype or the architecture of the foundation of the policies that he's implementing today. And and these are really high-level overview, but it's just to ground us and to let us know that these tools are really part of American history. So the first one I want to talk about is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And this was the first federal law that restricted immigration explicitly based on race. At that time, Chinese individuals were integral to the workforce and building of what we would call the nation. And yet, as that workforce of Chinese labor grew, they became increasingly seen as an economic threat to white labor. They were cast as unfair labor competition. They were scapegoated for any economic challenge that this country faced. And this narrative formed, really demonizing Chinese individuals. And in response to that, the outrage perpetrated by white labor and white families, the government implemented the Chinese Exclusion Act, which blocked Chinese workers, it put a ban on Chinese workers, and then it denied those already living here from becoming citizens, and that really created our first class of undocumented immigrants. And then I'm going to talk about a campaign that was waged in 1954 that Trump has glowingly and enviously talked about both on his first campaign trail and also the campaign leading up to his current administration. And it's called Operation Wetback, which, as we all know, that is a really, really derogative, offensive and racist term, but that was the official name of this campaign. And it was another case where immigration policy was created to address this perception of an economic threat and a backlash against immigrant labor. The fear that immigrant labor would displace white labor, even when Mexican individuals were invited here, and then their employers would exploit them. So Eisenhower, the president at the time, needed to do something to address this growing outrage. And the operation really was the beginning of modern deportation raids, as well as the militarization of the border. Massive numbers of individuals were violently deported and displaced, perhaps 1 million. And some of them were even US-Mexican citizens. It was a huge, huge humanitarian disaster, and many people died as they were left without water, without food, in communities that they had no relation to. And all along the way, what justified this brutal treatment was this fueling of anti-Mexican sentiment that this was necessary to protect the United States. And then that brings us to the third policy, which is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And for most of us, I think we've heard of this in relation to the facilitating the incarceration of individuals of Japanese ancestry during World War II, which has still considered the largest family detention project in this country. And the Alien Enemies Act states that whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So as we saw in World War II, this act gives vast powers and vast authority to the president to remove people without any process, without any court hearing, without any evidence. And now that same act is being used today to facilitate the removal of individuals this administration thinks are part of a Venezuelan gang. And these individuals are being sent to a terrorism confinement center in El Salvador, a maximum security prison that evidence has shown has deplorable conditions. So I talked about these three tools, these immigration policies, but I'm going to leave us with the most damning tool, which is the public narrative based on lies, deception, moral panic, xenophobic fear-mongering, and racist tropes to justify these actions, to create tolerance, to create acceptance by other Americans, to make it palatable and to make it feel like this is what's needed to keep us safe. How is this done? It's done by we instill fear in communities, we talk about this taking of jobs, and make it the cause of economic hardship for white families. We miscast immigrants as violent criminals, we leverage racist ideologies, and we ramp up this language of invasion. All of these policies had significant support from the American public because this tool of public narrative is so strong, it's so compelling, and so successful. Which is why we need to have these conversations today, because that tool, the tool of public narrative, is the one tool we actually have control over. So going back to that poll I mentioned, so this week the poll came out saying that 45% of Americans support Trump on immigration policy, but just 3 weeks ago, it was 50% of Americans. And consistently across the board, polls are showing a decline in support for these policies just in the last 3 weeks. And the consensus is that the reason why Americans are starting to lose support for these policies is because of the story of Mr. Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father, who is suddenly arrested and taken to El Salvador, to this prison, to this maximum security prison, because, as the administration admits, due to a mistake and administrative error. His story has opened up the American consciousness of the real people that are harmed by these actions. We now have heard his wife. We know about his children. These stories are starting to humanize the people that are really being harmed by these policies. And so our work here today is to unpack the myths. And in thinking about this, I started thinking, I have a problem with this word myth because it makes it seem like it's a benign thing. It's deception, it's manipulation, they're lies. So we're going to unpack these lies, and we're going to hear from advocates and activists who are on the ground working with communities who are facing these policies, who are living in fear, to really learn about what is currently happening, how these policies are harming people on the day-to-day, and what we can do to rise up and to continue to work on changing this public narrative so these policies stop. So now I have such an honor to introduce these two panelists who will help us unpack these lies and listen a little bit more about the humans and the real people that are being impacted. We have Jennyfer Mesa, who is the executive director of Latinos in Spokane, a Latino and immigrant-led nonprofit that's become a transformative force in Eastern Washington. Jennyfer's work sits at the intersection of racial justice, community development, and immigration policy. Through her leadership, she has increased cultural visibility, health equity, and livability for Latino and immigrant communities, shaping both local and state policies to reflect the needs and voices of those often left out of the conversation. And joining Jennyfer is Dannie Nemes, a dedicated survivor advocate with API Chaya, where she spent the past 8 years supporting survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, particularly within immigrant communities. With an MSW from the University of Washington, Dannie brings a trauma-informed, culturally responsive approach to her work and a deep commitment to justice and healing. Outside of her advocacy, she's a proud mom of 3, a passionate hula and Tahitian dancer, and shares her home with her husband of 23 years and 2 very loved mastiffs. These are visionary leaders and champions for community-led change. Please join me in welcoming Jennyfer Mesa and Dannie Nemes to the stage. Oh, they're already here. Sorry. So to ground us and to get started, I'd love to hear from both of you about what brings you to the work that you do and why are you here today?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jennyfer Mesa, and I am originally from Medellin, Colombia. I'm an immigrant, and I've lived in multiple places throughout my immigration process. From Medellin, I went to Miami, where I was raised and had my teenage years, and then immigration processes got in the way of me continuing to be here and to finalize my school here, for example, for high school. So I had to go back to Mexico City to be with family. And in the wait to be able to return to the country, which I knew, which I loved, which I celebrated all the American holidays, I wasn't able to be connected to my family because of immigration processes. So this work is very deep and has impacted my life and my family in many ways. When I was able to return 12 years later to reconnect with my family here, I came to Washington, where I was able to get a degree in urban planning and also start a life again, the American life that I dreamed of. So I've been in this, as an immigrant, I've been able to live in Colombia, Mexico City, Miami, and now here in Washington. I'm a former survivor, so I just wanted to say thank you to the YWCA, because this work, it's so personal when we're not able to feel safe or call for help when you have these layers that are creating harm. So just wanted to say thank you to the YWCA. I have a deep love for this organization. Shout out to Melba in Spokane, who saved my life. So I just wanted to say that. In addition to that, I think with the lived experience that I have and seeing the the different layers of how people aren't welcome, how they don't belong, how there is an invisible presence of Latino immigrants here in Washington State, especially in the east side of Washington, how we continue to want to advocate and say, hey, you belong, you're here, you pay taxes, you're raising your family here. But when we advance, there's always a pushback. So that is why I decided to really dedicate my life and my career into seeing how I can bring in more voice and more equity building to the immigrant population here in Washington State, who has been so systemically excluded on purpose and also just not recognized. So I think we're also so powerful and culturally rich, and we have so much that we bring through our immigration processes, through our experiences to Washington State, where we bring the cultural richness, we bring the profound dedication of labor, we bring in the food, the crops, I mean, so many other things that we are leading here in Washington State. And I hope that my work can also bring in that sense of pride to our communities of who we are and what we do and what we bring to the table, that now we can continue having greater conversations of, I'm not gonna be in this invisible presence. I do belong here in Washington State, and I'm here to make a better Washington State. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dannie, Nemes. And how did I come to this work? Well, I am a daughter of immigrants, a granddaughter, niece, sibling of immigrants. And I also experienced, domestic violence and child abuse growing up. And I think in going to school and wanting to learn more about my mother's culture from the Philippines, and also realizing that abuse was not talked about, especially in immigrant families. It's very taboo to talk about abuse that's happening in the home. So in undergrad, I really found a way to kind of bridge my experience as a survivor and trying to unpack all the different issues that happen when we can't talk about real harm. And so I actually was on a research project my final year in undergrad and was introduced to API Chaya. Back then it was called the Women and Family Safety Center. And there I just, a light bulb went off, and I was like, had these resources been around when I was younger, maybe I would have had, my sister and I would have had a different experience. And so, after working at API Chaya, I started working with human trafficking survivors, and it really did dispel the myth of like, this doesn't happen here. This is their problem over there, wherever that is. There's a lot of othering going on of like, this couldn't possibly happen in Seattle. And it really opened my eyes to, what immigrants face here on a daily basis, the levels of harm, the vulnerability, and just not having access to resources. And so this work is really rewarding, and it's just made me want to continue, especially in light of, the current administration and the anti-immigrant sentiment. It just makes it so much harder for survivors to access help. There's a lot of fear-mongering, as you had said, and it's really important for me to take my experience as a survivor, my experience as a daughter of immigrants, to, change what is currently happening and make resources more accessible. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing that. Jennyfer, when you were talking, you talked about the community having an invisible presence, and I'd love for you to unpack a little bit more for folks who may not have heard that before, what that really means, and how have you seen that play out? Why is that? Why do you think there is this invisible presence? If you could share more.
Yeah, so as immigrants, I think this isn't the first time we've had this sort of experience of mass deportation. For us, it's not really, it doesn't matter who's president, because we've seen this roller coaster of we belong, now we don't belong. You can come here, under these certain statuses, but these don't count. But the funny thing is, everybody counts when our labor is needed. Everybody counts when we have to be responding to the economic development of our country and also our state. And because we are grouped into these different statuses, some belong more than others. So I think what I refer to with the invisible presence is, depending on the policies that are going on in the nation, some groups will be more excluded than others. So right now, what we're seeing with the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment once again, mass deportation once again in this country, undocumented immigrants are going to have a shadowy presence in our community because they're not going to reach out for resources, they're not going to reach out for help in the fear of being targeted. And right now, we're all being targeted, but there's certain groups that are being targeted more. And I've been sharing this over and over the last couple of months. I've seen more deportations take place since inauguration than what I had in the last 4 years. So people are disappearing, people are being targeted, and those that are here maybe with documentation are also being targeted in that they're not able to maybe ask for their pay, ask for help with police, go to the hospitals, because now those rights of having sanctuary spaces have been stripped away. And because there's a leg up on who has the more power, that leaves people who are undocumented with less power. So it's very easy to see this invisible presence within our own communities, our own cities here in Washington State. And it's part of the reason why I started this work. Was I grew up in Miami, so we were everywhere. We had cultural activities everywhere. But when I got to Spokane, I was like, wow, where are we? Where's the international district? Where's the Latino neighborhood? Where's the Chinese neighborhood? We need one. What's going on here? And it was interesting to see how in Eastern Washington and across different cities within Eastern Washington, there's this high population of Latinos. But you wouldn't notice that if you go into these neighborhoods. If you go, just walk and see what are the colors, what are the buildings, how is the landscape reflecting the people? And it doesn't in many cases. So that is part of what I say is, what I'm sharing is invisible presence, is that it's very easy for somebody to come into a community and see that you wouldn't be able to tell if there was Chinese immigrants or if there was Latino immigrants there, because it's an invisible presence of people who are probably just working and going home, going to sleep, and not causing any disruption or asking for any help because they don't want to be targeted.
Thank you. And I would imagine that the folks who feel the most vulnerable are folks who may also be experiencing other sorts of oppressions. And I'm thinking, Dannie, about the work that you're doing at API Chaya. I think about to be an immigrant who is also a survivor of domestic violence in this moment, the impact of those things both happening at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with the folks that you are working with?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're scared, right? And so they're not asking for help. They're afraid to call law enforcement. I mean, I think the fear of law enforcement has always been there, right? But now it's escalated. And so even resources that we have put in place, like our state passed a Senate bill in 2022 that allowed certain victims of crime, domestic violence, trafficking, hate crimes, to be able to access state resources while they're waiting for, either their U or T visa that is specific to violent victims of crime. And we're seeing folks that are like, nope, don't want it. I don't want to apply for it. I don't want to access it. We're seeing folks be afraid to file police reports and get protection orders. I have clients that are afraid to go to the library. They're avoiding all federal buildings or state buildings because they're afraid of being picked up. Just a couple months ago, I had this heartbreaking situation where the 13-year-old daughter of one of my clients had to go to immigration court by herself because it was too risky for her mother to be there with her. And so here's this 13-year-old child in this courtroom with just the attorney and me. you know, it was all I could do to not cry during that. And then as soon as I left the courtroom, I cried, because that weight that she had to experience being alone and not having her mother by her side was just terrible. So yeah, there's just a lot of fear. And even the resources that we've created to help survivors, they're just afraid to access them. And it's really made folks more vulnerable to be exploited, to be abused, you know, and not have the resources or ability to get out of really dangerous situations.
That's really heartbreaking. And I think that we like to talk about Washington as being a very welcoming state, as being a sanctuary state. And yet this still is happening. And so I'm wondering, Jennyfer, I know you do a lot of organizing work to try to actually have Washington live into that value of being a true welcoming and sanctuary state. And I'm curious to know, what are you seeing that you think Washington could improve upon to actually make sure that folks feel safer and that we are protecting the folks that are currently here and the folks that we want to welcome in the future?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of groundwork, and one thing I like to share to give people hope is we passed some of the most progressive laws and policies during the last Trump administration. So we can do that again, and much more. I think right now we are at a point where we're analyzing, okay, we passed these progressive policies, one which was Keep Washington Working in 2019, 2020, where we were advocating for separating the powers between police, state agencies, and the federal agencies. So that was great groundwork that was led by many community organizers and organizations that put that forward. But unfortunately, we're still seeing a very strong presence of ICE and Border Patrol within our communities. And because this administration is moving so fast towards mass deportation, we're now seeing other branches of government that had not been involved in immigration enforcement. We now have TFA, DEA, IRS that's coming after immigrant-owned businesses and targeting businesses. We have U.S. Marshals that are now playing as vigilantes to keep track of workers, to keep track of these spaces where immigrants are. And I think that this is something that we did not plan for. So now there's this opportunity to go back to create more teeth, to create more accountability to keep Washington working. Yes, we have this protection where we can say, police, you cannot ask about immigration, you cannot ask about my status, where I was born, and this does create protections. But we're seeing right now is that there is a lot of funding coming in from right-wing conservative parties who are investing into lawyers and other programs to support local police agencies like Adams County, who violated the Keep Washington Working over 200 times. They're being funded and supported to basically counter this law and say, I'm not going to comply with Keep Washington Working, and I'm going to work with federal agents. So I think that we have a lot more work to do in accountability and creating greater enforcement of these rogue police, county police, sheriffs have to comply with Washington law. The law is the law, and how are we going to keep them accountable? And not wait up to 200 times of violation before we start enforcing and suing each of the cities. We need to start doing this now. I do think that there is protections. We have a great superintendent in our Washington state who's done everything possible to not allow immigration enforcement within our school districts. There's also been a lot of push. For example, in Spokane, we went directly to the school superintendents of District 81 and said, you need to up your policies to not fully ban Border Patrol and fully ban ICE from entering your campuses, because they do recruitment, because they're at the school parties, and they're there trying to recruit and get a good name for themselves. We also had issues where Border Patrol was going in to do storytelling to kids when they're fully armed, and they're not really considering how that impacts immigrant kids. When this happens, families pull out. They pull out their kids, they leave, and they go into hiding. They go back into that invisible presence. So that is what we're pushing back on, of yes, we have Keep Washington working. We are a relatively more progressive state, but we need that implementation and that enforcement and accountability now.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, like it sounds easy to continue to grow policies that protect immigrants here, but even in Washington, there are these lies, there are these assumptions that make it harder to make us even move forward with really protective policies. And Dannie, I'm wondering if there are persistent lies or myths that you want to unpack, that you are seeing, that you are having to kind of address in the work that you're doing.
I think, I think one of the myths that I hear often is that, immigrants are just here to take jobs and that they just want to drain the resources of, food stamps and these kinds of things. And, I will say that I said this before, it's really expensive to be poor, and it's really difficult for immigrants to access our state resources. Even with that Senate bill that I talked about earlier, it's been in existence for 3 years now, and we still have issues when we go to DSHS with clients. We still have to re-explain that they are eligible, and even after that, they still are being pressed to provide documents, and so it's not easy to get state assistance at all, and it's also really difficult to find work. A lot of our clients who are waiting for their visas because they're victims of crime have to wait several months, if not longer, to get a work permit. They have to wait several years for these visas. Some of them take in excess of 10 years. And during that time, they're not allowed to leave the U.S. They can't go back home, but they can't stay here and work. And so it creates more victimization towards them. They're more vulnerable. And so I don't know, there's this myth that it's just, that they're just draining our resources, that they're doing all these things, but it's really, really difficult for these, like you said, the invisible workers to just exist, right, and take care of their families. And one of the things that, of people saying, well, this doesn't happen in Washington. Well, even in Western Washington, we're seeing ICE vans show up in places that we didn't see them before. And, our clients are even afraid to attend the programs that API Chaya presents. They're afraid to come to these events and these things that we're have to help them to build community, to build resources, and they're just afraid. So it's happening here in Seattle. It's not just over there or across the, and it's really difficult for just them to exist and take care of themselves.
Can I add to that? I really love that you brought up the draining resources, because that is such a huge myth that keeps on getting played. Like it's played out, but every election we have to go through it, right? In 2019, Trump tweeted something about how undocumented immigrants are costing billions of dollars to the nation because they're draining our resources and blah, blah, blah. Well, the fact is, undocumented immigrants pay into our systems. They pay into our Social Security. They pay into all of our unemployment. They pay into so many of our federal resources that in the count right now is, I think, undocumented immigrants pay something closer to $30 billion a year. So these are contributions that they're giving us with their hard work labor, yet they cannot actually take that in. They cannot utilize that. So it's only paying into a system that isn't paying them back. And then when we bring that down to the state level, because there's also rumors of Washington State is giving away so much, Washington State is gaining from undocumented workers and families. Washington State as a whole, we all benefit from this hard work labor that people are not tapping into. So $1 billion is what undocumented immigrants contribute to the state, yet they cannot get that back. So if you are an undocumented worker and you have to go have a day off because you're sick. You don't have access to unemployment. You don't have access to health insurance unless you're paying into very, very high amounts. You don't get those resources that you're paying into. Yet we're all benefiting from that invisible labor. And the myth there is always used of they're draining, they're taking. And in fact, no, it's us that are draining and taking from these workers who are giving so much and get nothing back.
Thank you for saying that, because I
Agreed.
think that is not, and in addition to labor taxes, there's property taxes, there's sales taxes, there's excise taxes. There's so many taxes that folks are paying into and that in the end receive no benefits. How does this concept of this who deserves resources and who doesn't deserve resources, how is that showing up in the policies that you're seeing in the work that you're doing? And I don't know who wants to take this, but.
Well, I can start by, I always like to bring the federal level into this because we have not passed a comprehensive immigration reform in years. In years. We just passed an act in the first time in 20 years, which was the Lake and Riley Act. It took 20 years to make a decision on immigration, but it's not convenient for them to actually make this change because they're benefiting from our labor. So the Lake and Riley Act passed, and what does that mean at the federal level? And how is that trickling down to our communities? Is now anybody who can be accused, not even charged, just accused of a minor offense as like shoplifting or anything else, that is reason for to be targeted and to have for detention and to be removed. So I don't understand how a nation who is benefiting so much from immigrants, who is receiving the labor, the contributions, the cultural contributions, I mean, I can go on and on. Now we're just targeting to have people removed. And with that, with the Lake and Riley Act, it not only impacts immigrants, that impacts all of us, because that is a way of eroding our due process. And when there is no due process, that means that at the ground level, they're able to just detain you without reason and without warrants. And that should alarm everybody, not just immigrants, because we're all at that risk of having our rights taken away.
Dannie, I'm wondering if you can talk about how that fear has really evolved recently, and if you've seen a change in the folks that you're working with.
I mean, yes. Like I said, they are extremely fearful. They're afraid to go anywhere. They're afraid to just, even let their children go to school. I work with whole families at times, and the children are very terrified, and they are experiencing their friends being deported. Right now we're trying to have be able to address the entire family. I mean, we always have done that work, but we're really trying to be more intentional about that now. Having conversations, hard conversations with the kids about what is coming up for you, what fears do you have, and so yeah, it's really frightening. And a lot of our clients, they can't go back to their home countries, right? Because there's a reason they fled in the first place, right? Whether it's gang violence or poverty or this, that, and the other. And so they're really in a hard place of where they don't feel like they can stay here. They don't feel, because of all the sentiment, they don't feel like they belong here, but they can't go back home. A lot of them, that were born here have never even had, any connection with I guess their home country or whatever. And so it's really, really difficult. But yeah, I just think that there's just a lot of fear, and again, they don't feel like they can ask for help. They don't feel comfortable accessing any benefits that they are, that were created for them. And so that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing, all the immigration stuff take a lot longer as well. Work permits taking a year, or and just this waiting for some relief, and things just getting harder and harder. Yeah.
Thank you. Jennyfer, I had talked about the fact that the story of immigration in our country is so tied up with race and racism. And I think on the theoretical level, that's easy to understand, but I'm hoping you can like bring it back to what you see in the communities that you work with. How is racism playing out and tied into immigration policies in the communities that you serve?
I think the policies that you were just mentioning are still impacting immigration to this day. And we can align these cases of the Chinese Exclusion Act and all these other immigration cases that have made immigration what it is today. And it's always tied to labor and also tied to upholding white supremacy. So who belongs, who gets welcomed, who gets the red carpet treatment is tied to race. It's tied to your nationality and the relationships that we have with those countries, and who's welcomed in. So there's a reason why we see that kids were separated from their families from certain groups, but others weren't. Others are welcomed in. And I want that to sit with people, because why is it that we can allow that pain, that trauma to brown kids versus European kids? And I love all kids, so I don't want it to come off of saying, oh, it's one side or the other. It's not. But why is it that we allow that to happen to our children? And all of that is tied to immigration policy and history. And that history, again, it's tying white supremacy values and labor. I really want to hone down on labor, because labor has determined when, how, and who can stay as well. But also immigration labor is tied to who's benefiting. So right now, I want to highlight, because we did talk about Washington State, and Washington State has been growing its guest worker program, the H-2A program, by over 200% in just the last couple of years. So this means that we're creating this labor shortage, this othering of immigrants, while also bringing in guest workers. So I bring that because this is all tied to race. How our people are able to be in getting your immigration status is nearly impossible. It took me over 30 plus years to become a citizen, and my mom became a citizen in the 90s. It was just, there is no line. It's so difficult to become a resident and a citizen of this country. But while you're in that process, you are more prone to be undocumented. I lived part of my life as being undocumented, not being able to have a work permit to work. And that is a story of many immigrants. But it's usually the story of many people of color that are immigrants. And we're still here. We're still making it work. We're getting up to work every day, regardless of our status, to work, right? And that is tied to labor, because this country has been so used to that invisible labor taking place. But what happens when it's not beneficial to companies and corporations and landowners? It's not convenient for them, and I'll talk about growers in Washington State, food processors in Washington State. What happens when they have a worker that has a sick child and needs to stay home, or take them to the doctor, or pick them up early? It's not convenient for them. It's also not convenient for racist communities when they see these guest workers come in, and workers are not just robots. We're people. We now have families because we want our family to be together. We have children, and they see that those communities start gaining population. It creates these fears of, they're coming for me, they're taking my job, they're doing all of this, right? And that is tying all of this and these myths to racism in our communities. So again, what happens when these workers are now becoming families and becoming communities? We start pushing back. And corporations start pushing back because they don't want to have to pay all the additional taxes that it takes to support a family, time off, unemployment, benefits. So it's much easier for some of these corporations to bring in these guest workers because it's a controlled labor force who they have complete control of, even sometimes obtaining their passports, their documents. And when they start saying, hey, I'd like to get some benefits, or maybe make minimum wage, or have a housing that is substandard, then they can easily deport them and remove the problem. So this is something that is happening across our country, where we're seeing this growing numbers of H-2A guest workers. And today it'll be farm workers, right? Because farm workers, our local farm workers, are getting pushed out. But what happens with roofers? What happens when it turns into other jobs? Immigrants are not taking American jobs. They're creating jobs. The people who are taking our jobs are those corporations who are benefiting, are those people who are doing insider trading right now, because we see that the stock market is going all sorts of volatile ways. People are benefiting from that. So that is completely tied to race and immigration history and what we're seeing today. And what we're seeing today is not new. This is, like you said, this is an old playbook that they're using to say who belongs, who can stay, and who is worthy. But this is a union state, and we have rights. And if our economy is tied to our labor and to our work and what we're doing, what we're contributing, we should be receiving more benefits and more support, especially for those families. But I just want to say one thing about labor is the majority of the people who have been detained and deported since Trump was inaugurated, they're all workers. Washington State has how many less workers right now? Roofers, people who are working in the fields. You know, this is going to impact and trickle down to all of us. And they're targeting people like activists and immigrants and labor organizers. I want to give a shout out to Lelo Juarez, who's right now in detention in Tacoma for organizing farm workers, for working and organizing farm workers. He was targeted. So this is being silenced, and this is trickling down. Sorry it took so long, but I get passionate about that.
No, I appreciate it. Dannie, did you want to jump in and say something?
I can't think of anything right now except, you know, the idea that, well, what you were saying about, you know, like workers being brought in, right? Even the workers that are being brought in, as you mentioned, they're promised certain things in their home country, right? And they're promised, you know, good wages, long work weeks, that their housing is going to be taken care of, that they'll have health insurance, you know, all these different things. And then when they get here, and I think this just dispels the myth of like, you know, people who come here legally versus the right way, right? Because we hear that a lot. That's a big thing, you know. Well, I'm okay with the ones that come here the right way. Well, let's talk about those that come here the right way. Again, they're being lied to, and working for large corporations that are able to kind of distance themselves from what's happening on the ground, right? The CEOs are like, well, I didn't know what was happening down there. But we're seeing folks, oh, there goes my earring. We're seeing folks that come here through legal channels with work visas, and then when they get here, all the things that they were promised don't exist, right? So now, instead of 40 hours a week, they're working 20 hours a week. Instead of $25 an hour, it's $10 an hour. Oh, and by the way, we don't have housing for you. And if you get hurt, oh, well, you know, and it's turned into indentured servitude, right? Because we paid all this money for you to come here to work, and now you have to pay for housing. So it makes it so that they're stuck here, right? They don't have enough money to go back home. They don't have enough money to stay here. They definitely don't have money to send back to their families. And so this, you know, and their documents are being held. There's also the promise of that you know, immigration is going to be filed on their behalf. You know, permanent immigration, this kind of thing. None of that happens. And so we see a lot of that, and predominantly it's targeted towards men, you know, that are brought here for construction, working in the fields. I think one of the things I would say is just, you know, talking about dispelling myths, you know, trafficking does happen here, and it does happen predominantly to men, right? And I think when we think about trafficking, we think sex trafficking, and we think women and children, but a majority of our clients who are being trafficked are men in these, invisible workforces, and they have very little. It's really difficult to prove all these things. It takes a really long time for them to apply for visas. And again, they're stuck here without work permits for a really long time. They also have to cooperate with law enforcement, which, adds a whole nother level of traumatization sometimes. And so, yeah, that's what I would say about that it's really damaging.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I think there is that program that brings in these guest workers. But then we also have these street H-2A programs where we have construction companies that are bringing in people from states that are probably more targeted, like Florida and Georgia. We've seen people that they're bringing them in from these states and making them work in construction or different fields without any equipment, training, and they put immigrants into tiny apartments where they're all have to live with other people. It's really alarming because, again, they don't have any control of their lives where they can say, okay, I don't feel safe at this job and I can report this, or I can go back home. Their freedom is completely taken, and they're tied to their boss or the one who is organizing that trafficking. And if they retaliate, then they get threatened with ICE or deportation. So this is happening a lot and in our community. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I will say that one of the greatest pleasures when I was an anti-trafficking advocate, and one of the things that is celebrated now with my coworkers and stuff is family reunification, because that's another thing that we don't talk about, is how many families get separated as a result of someone being brought here to work, right? Again, through legal channels, and then they don't get to see their families for years. At these family reunifications, we're seeing families that haven't seen their children since they were infants, right? And now they're grown adults. It takes that long. It takes that long for the process. They left when their children were infants, and now their children are coming here as grown adults, and they're strangers, right? And our agency, I feel like does a good job of trying to, set them up for success of like, who is this person that I'm related to, that I've loved and longed for so long, and now we're strangers. We try to do our best to prepare them and give them all the love and support that they need to now function as a family unit. But it's incredibly painful and incredibly difficult. And that's just not something that people understand or realize is happening.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too about how difficult it is to come here, and that myth of there's certain groups that come here the legal way. I support legal migration, but everyone who came in here seeking asylum in the past few years did everything right. They reported to the border, they applied for asylum, they're going through all these processes. And let me tell you all something, it costs about $8,000 to $10,000 to get representation from an immigration attorney for an asylum case. So if you arrived here with nothing, guess what? You have to come up with some way to live, pay rent, work without a work permit, and also pay for your immigration processes. Because if you're able to get an attorney, you're 80% more likely to win your case. But if you don't have an attorney, you have to go through all these complex immigration forms to apply for asylum. Regardless, you come in, you do it the right way. You came here and you obtained status legally. And what are we seeing now? That all of that has been stripped away. And they're undocumented now, and they're targeted now. Just last week, our clients started receiving a notice that said, you have 7 days to remain in the US. And if you don't leave, then we can come after you. This is a scary thing to receive for people who fled violence, who walked how many countries to get here for the promise of the US. And then they're here for only 1 to 2 years doing everything the right way, and then we want to send them back. And we don't only want to send them back, we want to incarcerate them because there's money being made in the prisons. We don't know how long they're going to be detained for, or if they're going to send out to one of our new prison colonies, which could be in Cuba or it can be in El Salvador. This is not normal, and these are dangerous times. And I hope that this sparks a bit of curiosity, but also interest for us to think it doesn't matter your status right now. Your immigration status could be stripped away at any moment, and you could be just as undocumented and at risk as everyone else.
Yeah, I think I've heard Trump threaten, and it's probably going to happen, to remove TPS, temporary protected status, from folks. And I think there's 4 million people, around maybe more, of folks with temporary protected status in the United States who will suddenly, all of a sudden, who are here legally, have status, will suddenly then become quote unquote illegal because of a stroke of a pen. And then where does that leave us? And there's no way that we have a machine, or I'm hoping and praying we don't have a machine to be able to deport 4 million people that quickly. But you have all these people who are now here without status, who are less safe, more vulnerable. It doesn't make any policy sense.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, we have clients that have gone through the entire process, have waited years and years to get their work permits, their visas, all these things. They haven't been able to travel back home to see their families, their ailing parents, they're growing older and older every year and getting sick, and all the things that happen. And then they're finally able, they finally have all the documents and everything, and now they're afraid to go home because they're afraid that they won't be able to come back in, Yeah, it's really frightening.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, one more thing.
Please.
The other myth, that we're all criminals, right? And this is why they gotta round us up and take us out of here, because we're all criminals. None of the cases that I've seen in the past couple months have involved criminals. One of maybe 60 deportations that I know of had an accusation, just an accusation, but no charges. And they're in the Tacoma Detention Center right now. So that means that our due process is non-existent. And these agents and agencies are operating without rule of law. And that is really alarming. But the criminalization of what happens with somebody that's done everything right, gone through the immigration process 15, 20 years, that gets stripped away, and now they are a criminal. These aren't criminals. We aren't criminals. And the data reflects it.
And I also want to be clear that when we talk about the Northwest Detention Center, we call it a detention center, but it really is a prison. It looks like a prison, it feels like a prison, and in fact, there's been numerous hunger strikes of folks inside protesting the really, really terrible conditions inside of that center. And it is a private prison that the state has no control over, the state has no oversight over, the state can barely even go inside to make sure people's needs are being met. And so we call these things detention centers, but that's really not being accurate about what there are. We're sending folks to prison. One of the things that you were saying, Jennyfer, is that, when we're talking about how our racist kind of journey through this country is so tied to immigration, when I've been thinking about how folks can do, what folks can do to kind of understand more about immigration in a way that makes it personal to them, I think especially for many European Americans who have a lineage of from immigration, but may have been generations ago. I think it's really important for those folks who have come through immigration from Europe and their connection to immigration maybe generations ago to really stop and do an analysis of looking at why their families came here. Because I would imagine that their families came here because they were also seeking opportunity, that they were also seeking jobs. And then look at the laws that were in place at the time they came over. Were there any laws? Were they just provided amnesty? Were they able to walk off the ship on Ellis Island and have total freedom to call this country their home? And then I also want folks with that lineage to look to see if they weren't European American, what were the laws that would have impacted them? And I think for those folks to really sit down and think about, if your family that has been here for generations benefited because you were able to come into this country with ease, and you were successful because you were able and welcomed, to really recognize that, and to think about also families who are here despite the significant trials and tribulations, spending 30 years to get status, what that does to that family. Because I think sometimes for folks who have European American history, this feels very, very separate and very other. But for European Americans, you are also part of the immigration story, and I think it's really imperative that you recognize, like, where did it benefit you? How did it benefit you? And really understand that for the vast majority of European Americans, they came in without any sort of struggle, and there was no laws that prevented them, there was no applications, there was no 30 years fighting for status, and that really has made a difference, I think, in who you see being successful and who not. And going back, Jennyfer, to, a lot of the times these fear-mongering around labor is really a distraction for what is really happening. Like, we all are distracted right now. We are all distracted by these stories of immigration, and we're trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. And meanwhile, they're lighting everything on fire. And that's a constant story too, the scapegoating, the using this as a distraction to take our eyes off of seeing what they're really doing, I think is a really important point that you made. So shifting to, like, what are the things that people can do in this moment? How do we, as a community, work to help keep people safe? Jennyfer, I'm going to start with you because I know that you're organizing on this right now. You're talking to lawmakers, you're talking to policymakers to really figure out, like, what are the steps that our state can do. So both on a policy-wise, but also for folks at home that may not be connected to the state policymakers, like, what are things that we can do to start addressing what's happening?
Yeah, I'd like to just share a little insight on what we're seeing in Eastern Washington, because sometimes we tend to think of what's happening at the city level, the cities that have the greater population. But I feel like sometimes I live on the other side of the state that doesn't always get that much attention, or some sort of strange attention, in that in these rural communities, we have, and in Spokane, which is, a city, we have conflict right now. So Spokane, we were able to pass a local resolution to uphold Keep Washington Working and have the city be able to allocate funding for legal and immigration services, because we're preparing for what's coming. Our neighboring city, Spokane Valley, decided to do another resolution to say that they will not uphold Keep Washington Working, and that they will work with federal agents to help in deportations. That's Eastern Washington. Not only that, Eastern Washington is, in this area that I'm honing in on, Spokane Valley, Spokane County, we are 100 miles within the border. We are 20 miles by Idaho. And we have all sorts of federal agents right now, from Border Patrol to ICE to TFA, DEA, and now we're seeing U.S. Marshals that are more on the ground. So we have this trifecta just because we're in the eastern part of the state, and trifecta with the borders and Idaho. What we're seeing right now is people are being taken from our communities. And I'm going to share a story. Just 2 days ago, I got a call from a community member who said, hey, my roommates left in the morning at 5 a.m. Every day they have the same routine. They get up, they make their coffee, they put their roofer gear on, and one of them always warms up a tortilla and puts cheese on it and takes it to go with his coffee. They left in one car. That's the routine. They always leave a little bit earlier than us, and then the other roommates leave. When they went outside, they saw that their roommate's car was on, and the coffee was there, and the food, the breakfast was still there. Everything was intact, including the car keys, and they disappeared. They didn't know of their whereabouts. They didn't know what to do, and they're too afraid to go to police, so they came to us to say, can you help? Can you help us file a police report? Yes, they could have been taken by ICE and Border Patrol, but we don't know if anybody else came in. This is what we're constantly seeing in our community. And what happened is when people are taken, ICE and Border Patrol can sometimes hold them up to 72 hours, even if they're young minors. So 72 hours, they're not even registered, and you don't know where your loved one is. You don't know if they're still in Spokane, or if they're in Tacoma, or if they're being deported. I share this with you all because this is the reality that we're seeing right now. And it is so alarming that we have to wait so long. I mean, just think about the pain, the worry that this can cause families and just people in general. In Eastern Washington, when they get picked up now, they're taken across the state line to Idaho, and they're held in the Kootenai Detention Center there. So Washington residents who are working here, who are paying taxes here, who are contributing to our state's economy, get picked up and taken out of state and held in detention until there's enough room in the Tacoma Detention Center. This is so scary because the fact that we can be moved across state lines, moved out of the country, removed so swiftly, so fast, it's how do we counter that? We can't go up against federal agents as organizers, right? We can't stop an arrest, but what we can do is inform you all that this is what impacts me impacts you. The people who are being arrested are all roofers. They're building our homes. They're building our roofs. You know, they're construction workers. They're farm workers. They're bringing our crops. They're processing our foods. 98% of farm workers in our state are Latino immigrants. What are we gonna do, y'all? This is not just an immigrant issue. This is an everyone issue. So what we can do is, one, flood the lines to our politicians. Our local elected politicians need to stand up because we can't have this militarization in our communities, and it is happening. We need to inform each other of what's happening to keep our neighbors safe. So our organization right now, Latinos in Spokane, we are providing family plans. We opened our first immigration legal center where we're able to provide legal, civil and immigration support, but there is so little funding, and our funding for most immigration agencies is being removed, that we need to now look to our neighbors, to our own people in our communities to say, we need funding so that we can do this work and continue to do this work. It's not sustainable that people have to pay thousands of dollars to an immigration attorney. You know, one of the reasons it took me 30 plus years was because my mom was making minimum wage. We cleaned homes, we cleaned houses, we sold roses on the street. We couldn't afford an immigration attorney. So everything that we had, any disposable income just went into paying that attorney. And even when we paid every single dime we had, it still took us 30 plus years. And it still took me being removed and not being able to come back into the country and be with my family for over 12 years. So what people can do is look to the people who are doing this important work and fund them. Channel your donations to continue this work. And I ask everybody that we need to stand up and be brave, you know, because I'm lucky that I get to work in this. I work and serve for the most bravest people in our country. The farm worker that has to get up every day undocumented and still have to get up at 5 a.m. to work the crops, knowing that there could be ice behind him, that he could be targeted and not come home. He and her, because there are a lot of women who are doing this farm work, and they're doing this work every single day. Those are the people that you're benefiting from and you need to support. So turn to the people who are doing this important work.
Thank you. Dannie, what would you like to share about what folks need to do?
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I think that, you know, one of the most important things that I would encourage people to do is talk to these invisible workers. You know, come to these communities and talk to people, get to know them, right? Instead of just listening to what's on the news and what the popular narrative is, get to know these people, understand what their stories are, and then talk about that with your people, with your families, right? So that we can understand what's real and what's being put out there. Again, donate. Like Jennyfer had said, it is so expensive to get an attorney. And places like Northwest Justice Project or Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project, you know, they have pro bono attorneys there that can help immigrants and immigrant survivors. But there's, you know, they're overworked, you know, and there's not enough of them, and we really need donations to agencies like those, and like API Chaya. Like you said, some of our funding is tied federally, right, and through the state, and when that funding gets frozen or whatever, and is targeted because we're helping immigrants, you know, what do we do? And, you know, I echo that the people that I serve, they are incredibly brave, incredibly resilient, and they're going through unimaginable harm and fear, but yet they show up to work every day. You know, they take care of their families, they put money into our economy, and like you said, get very little to nothing back. They pay taxes. You know, it's the call to action is to, you know, get to know these people, call your local representatives, donate, volunteer, you know, all the different things. And then the other thing I would say, and this goes to like larger organizations, is, you know, don't preemptively stop doing what you've already been doing, right? One of the scares that we've seen specifically with like our LGBTQ communities is we've seen organizations that have always supported LGBTQ people, all of a sudden now we're removing our pronouns from our emails, and we're, you know, changing the names of this and that so that we don't get our funding cut. Well, I encourage you to be brave and to double down, right? And to help these people, you know, to be the place where they can come, and not to change your policies before you're forced to, right? Because there's a fear of being forced to or whatever. You know, as a mother of a trans son, it just kills me that things have become more unsafe for him. You know, seeing agencies that we would normally go to for help, or even hospitals, say, oh, we can't provide this care anymore, or, you know, you can't get your medication anymore. It's so aggravating. So yeah, just double down, do the work that you are already doing, help those that are doing the work on the ground, and go talk to your community members, get to know them and know that they are real people just like you, that are just trying to, you know, live their lives.
Thank you for saying that about organizations, because I think we should also make a big call out to corporations, to universities, to all these other agencies that are stripping away the hard work that we did, right? It took us years to get to this little brink of creating equity. And in just a matter of weeks and months, they're stripping that away. And I mean, yes, thank you for doing that, because we can tell your performance, right? And we don't want to go there. We don't want to support that with our money. We don't want to be there. But to those who are still thinking, what do we do? They're going to take your money away anyway. They're going to come after you anyway, right? So you might as well fight back, because if it's not in your federal funding, it's going to be in your rights and in your due process. So you might as well fight back.
100%.
Yes. So as we wrap up, we just have a couple more minutes. Is there anything that you need to say that we didn't cover in the last moments here?
This work is hard, y'all. It's hard, but I'm proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think that throughout our history, we've been challenged in many ways, especially communities of color, the LGBTQ plus community. This isn't new, but there is a shift in how fast all of this is happening, and how long can we sustain this, this trauma, this daily stress, this risk to families, to children. I think we can't wait for the elected officials to do everything. There's nobody that's going to come in to save us. And it has to come from ourselves, that we need to step up individually to support people, and especially to support the people who are on the ground, because if they burn out, who's going to help them? We really need to pay attention to those who are doing the work, and also not wait around for somebody else to come to save us. Please write, protest, go out, fund, defund, but get active and be as brave as those undocumented workers that have to do this on a daily basis.
Use your privilege. Use your privilege. I can't stress that enough. You know, if you have the privilege to have a voice and you don't have to fear, you know, I'm a U.S. citizen. I can use my voice on social media out there protesting and stuff, and I don't have to fear about, well, except for my son, maybe. Sorry, I don't want to start crying, but you know, use your privilege to help those, to help others. It's so important.
Well, I want to thank you both for being so brave and so clear in this moment and sharing these stories and sharing your wisdom. I think this is the work that needs to be done. We need to humanize the folks that are experiencing these horrific attacks and spread their stories and wake people up, get people out. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for the wonderful conversation today. I learned a lot, and it really did humanize the subject matter, and just really appreciate you being a part of this today. Thank you. Hello, I am Renee Cogdell-Lewis, and I'm the co-chair of the POCEC and a proud member of the YWCA board. I hope you're feeling as energized as I am to take meaningful action in your community. Events like this remind us just how much progress is being made and how much work still lies ahead. This gathering is part of Until Justice Just Is, a national YWCA USA campaign aimed at raising awareness of structural racism and building a strong, united community of anti-racist advocates. For over a decade, the POCEC, an advisory council made up of people of color who are both community members and YWCA board representatives, has been at the heart of organizing this event. We remain deeply committed to the YWCA's mission and firmly believe that the solutions to the challenges facing our communities begins with us. Thank you for stepping up and becoming a part of that solution. If you're interested in joining me and other POCEC members in the fight against racism, we'd love to connect with you. Just send a message to the email shared in the chat. And mark your calendars. The 2025 YWCA Inspire Luncheon will be held on September 18th at the Westin Seattle, featuring keynote speaker Janet Mock, who is a writer, TV producer, and activist. This event will be offered both in person and via live stream, with registration opening in June. Thank you so much for being here today. You'll find all of the resources mentioned linked in the chat and available on the YWCA's website, along with a recording of this program. On behalf of the YWCA, Seattle, King, and Snohomish, and the POCEC, thank you. Keep standing strong against racism, today and every day. We hope to see you next year. Thank you.